On this episode of the Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast, we travel back to 1935 to take a look at the historic first month of wrestling action at the Klamath Armory in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Welcome to the Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast, the podcast that covers the history of pro wrestling at the Klamath Armory and Auditorium in Klamath Falls, Oregon. My name is Grant Pachoco, and now, on to the show. Episode 1, October 1935. The Klamath Armory hosted its first wrestling event on Tuesday, October 1st, 1935. But wrestling had been a regular occurrence in Klamath Falls, Oregon for years before that, thanks to promoter Mack Lillard. According to the Vernonia Eagle newspaper out of Vernonia, Oregon, Mack Lillard was a Sunday school teacher from Spokane, Washington, who was also a boxing instructor. He boxed a bit, too, racking up 17 career wins, 15 by KO, and only 6 losses. Lillard started as a boxing promoter, and while he still kept his hand in that, he turned to promote wrestling all throughout Northern California and Southern Oregon, including Klamath Falls. In November and December 1932, the Evening Herald and Klamath News newspapers reported that Mack Lillard, who'd previously promoted boxing in Klamath Falls, wanted to bring back wrestling to the city. In January 1933, the Klamath News announced that Lillard had set a date for the return of wrestling to the Legion Hall in Klamath Falls. The event would happen on January 20th, 1933, and, going forward, would alternate weekly with boxing cards at the same venue. On January 13th, the Klamath News reported that Mack Lillard had been named a full-time promoter for the Klamath Falls Boxing and Wrestling Commission. Before that, he'd only been an assistant promoter under Herb Owen, father of Don Owen, who would later run Pacific Northwest Wrestling. There would be some delays, and Mack Lillard's first full card of wrestling at the Legion Hall in Klamath Falls took place on Friday, February 24th, 1933. And Fridays became a regular date for wrestling in Klamath Falls. Mack Lillard would continue to promote boxing and wrestling throughout the next 2 years, and the events proved to be very popular in the area. On Tuesday, September 17, 1935, the Evening Herald reported that wrestling would be leaving the Legion Hall and moving to the newly built Klamath Armory building. The paper said, "All in all, the game at the Legion Hall has been pretty good, and the spectators Friday night will say goodbye to the arena with some regrets." On Saturday, September 21st, 1935, along with the results of the final card at the Legion Hall, the Evening Herald announced that Mack Lillard would be holding a Battle Royal and 2 other regular matches on the first show at the Klamath Armory. The article lists the names of people who might be participating, including Les Wolf of Texas, Toots Estes of Hawaii, and Al Karasick of Portland. Lillard announced that there'd be no change in prices from the shows at the Legion Hall, and 2,000 seats would be available to wrestling fans. On Monday, September 23rd, 1935, a week of heavy promotion in the Evening Herald began. Tickets for the reserved seats at the Armory would go on sale Wednesday. On Tuesday, September 24th, Lillard announced some of the wrestlers signed to the event, and getting top billing was Al Karasick, who the Evening Herald called the Russian Lion of Portland. The paper noted that Karasick was one of the chief attractions in Klamath wrestling, and Lillard thought it fitting he should be at the opening card. Joe Hubka, former University of Nebraska fullback, was also announced. The next night, the Evening Herald ran a picture of Mack Lillard in an article that proclaimed that Lillard had signed 5 wrestlers for the Battle Royal that would be the feature of the first card at the Klamath Armory. Topping the list was the previously mentioned Al Karasick. Al Karasick was born in Russia. This former ballet dancer came to the United States in 1914 and, after some amateur wrestling in San Francisco, turned pro in 1921. His debut match was in Hayward, California at a carnival. He would later go on to be the owner of the Honolulu booking office for the NWA. Next announced was Count Joseph Vargo of Hungary, who the paper called a 150-pound wrestler who will be the only unfamiliar face among the 5 men in the free-for-all. Vargo had matches as far back as 1912, and he was also the father of wrestler Billy Varga, but for reasons you will see, we'll leave off the biography of Vargo for just a little bit. Next announced was Toots Estes of Hawaii, though everything I've found says that he was born in Texas. At the time, Toots was a former NWA Hawaii Junior Heavyweight Champion. Joe Hubka was listed next. The paper said he was born in Nebraska and was a fullback for the University of Nebraska. His last recorded match was a loss to Cowboy Luttrell in Lincoln, Nebraska in 1943. The final wrestler announced was Dan Savich from Utah. Debuting in 1934, Savich would go on to win several titles, including the World Junior Heavyweight title and Heavyweight and Tag Team Championships in NWA Texas. The Evening Herald noted that Savich canceled a barnstorming trip through Western Canada in order to be in Klamath Falls for the Armory opening. These 5 men would meet in a battle royal, with the last 2 men facing off one-on-one in a one-fall-to-a-finish match. The other 2 matches on the card would both be 2 out of 3 falls affairs with 40-minute time limits. The only competitor announced for those matches was Babe Estes, Toots' brother. Now, as far as I can tell, Babe debuted earlier in the year in July 1935, and his first match was against Al Karasick at the Hollywood Legion Stadium in Los Angeles. Babe would go on to hold the Mississippi version of the Southern Light Heavyweight title in 1938. On Wednesday, tickets went on sale, and the paper said that all the views in the 2,000-seat Klamath Armory were unobstructed. A new PA system owned by the Armory Board would be installed and used for the very first time on Tuesday night, and wrestling fans' favorite ushers from the Legion Hall wrestling shows would be on hand to maintain order with the crowd. Jack Franey, probably, the newspaper said, would announce the card, with Sid Herbert keeping time. Veteran referee Ray Frisbee of Medford, Oregon would officiate, and an alternate official would be on hand just in case anything happened to Frisbee in the Battle Royal. Foreshadowing? Possibly. On Thursday, September 26th, the Evening Herald printed that Mack Lillard claimed that tickets were in high demand for the debut show at the Armory. The mystery surrounding just who Count Joseph Vargo was teased, with Lillard promoting that the now 195-pound rangy athlete was one of the best grapplers obtained for Klamath Falls in months. The wrestlers signed so far for the Battle Royal were given their due, along with a brief comment on their signature moves. Al Karasick with his headlocks and Boston Crab, Toots Estes with his jiu-jitsu skills, Joe Hubka with his leg scissors, and Dan Savich with his flying tackle. Count Vargo, the Evening Herald reported, remains the only one of these 5 whose style of attack is unknown. In addition to Toots Estes' brother Babe, who would be competing in one of the singles matches in the evening, Bob Kenaston, a Marine from San Diego, California, was touted as possibly appearing. 1935 was Bob Kenaston's rookie year as well. He debuted a few weeks prior at one of the Legion shows. He'd go on to win several junior heavyweight titles in the future. Thursday's article also mentions that the Armory show will see the debut of a new, larger wrestling ring that, as the paper says, should go far to make the Battle Royal faster and full of action. Friday's paper proclaimed that wrestling's debut at the Klamath Armory would likely sell out, marking one of the largest indoor crowds to gather in Klamath Falls history. Mack Lillard reported strong sales and was sure the event would sell out by bell time. On Monday, September 30th, 1935, the Evening Herald reported that even though the official formal dedication of the Klamath Armory wouldn't happen until October, it actually wouldn't take place until November 11th, 1935, Mack Lillard's wrestling event on October 1st, 1935 would be the building's first big public event. Lillard crowed in the paper that 2 reserve seat sections were already sold out and general admission would go on sale at 7:30 the night of the show at the Armory ticket booth. The paper reported that the complete opening card was set, mostly. Turns out that the heavily promoted Count Joseph Vargo of Hungary was having second thoughts about participating in the five-man battle royal and might not wrestle at all. Lillard ruminated that Paul Boesch of Brooklyn or Harry Dementrell of Chicago might be possible replacements should Vargo not show up. The opening match signed would feature two grapplers from nearby Medford, Oregon. Curly Woods and Floyd Wolfgang were set to open the show in the first of two best-of-3 falls 40-minute time limit matches. These two had been regulars at Lillard's Legion Hall shows, and the last time they met each other was said to be one of the best matches of the year. By all accounts, Curly Woods, who was a former Pacific Coast middleweight champion, was winding down his career at this point with only a handful of matches after this one on record. Floyd Wolfgang would wrestle in the area for a few years longer. Finally, it was announced that the previously named grapplers Babe Estes and Bob Kenaston would face off against each other in the other opening match. Tuesday, October 1st, 1935 was the day of the show, and the article in the Evening Herald was in full pitch mode to sell the remaining tickets for the evening's event. The wrestling show got the headline of the sports page, usually page 2 in the Evening Herald in 1935. The article below the headline stated that doors to the Armory would open promptly at 7 p.m. At that same time, 1,000 general admission tickets would go on sale as well. The opening match was scheduled to start right at 8:30 p.m. with an opening ceremony and some speech-making beforehand. One last-minute wrinkle had arose as hinted to in the paper the day before. Count Joseph Vargo, the Evening Herald reported, had flat out refused to participate in the Battle Royal, prompting Mack Lillard to replace him with Harry Dementrell, who the paper described as the rough Greek from Chicago. Dementrell's first recorded match was in 1918, and he'd wrestled across the United States and in Canada and New Zealand. He'd also wrestled before in Klamath Falls in notable matches against Al Karasick. Toots Estes, Joe Hubka, and Dan Savich were all again confirmed for the Battle Royal as well. The rest of the card, Curly Woods versus Floyd Wolfgang and Babe Estes versus Bob Kenaston, were promoted too. The article wraps up by cementing Tuesday night as the night, going forward, that Mack Lillard would present wrestling at the Klamath Armory. A second smaller blurb in the same paper touts the Klamath Armory Arena as one of the best arenas in all of Oregon. Mack Lillard, the paper reported, had worked for several weeks and went to considerable expense to make the drill hall in the Armory exactly right for the wrestling fans. The Armory was near sold out on October 1st, 1935. The Evening Herald reported that the ringside and elevated reserve sections were sold out completely, and only a handful of seats in the far wings of the balcony were vacant. Though no official numbers were given, the attendance estimation was 1,800 wrestling fans. The fans, awed by the fineness of the Armory's wrestling setup, were ready for what the paper would call an outstanding card. The opening bout christened the Armory and the new ring in blood as Curly Woods and Floyd Wolfgang stepped through the ropes to do battle. Woods was the aggressor in this 2 out of 3 fall match, but Wolfgang fought hard. Wolfgang picked up the first fall in 14 minutes and 55 seconds with a combination wristlock and hammerlock. Woods' arm was sprained as a result and became Wolfgang's target in the second fall after only 1 minute and 40 seconds of action. The same wristlock-hammerlock combination gave the victory to Floyd Wolfgang. Though the paper mentions blood being spilled, whose blood and how are never mentioned. The evening's second match featured Big Bob Kenaston taking on Babe Estes, and it started with some controversy. In a previous bout at the Klamath Falls Legion Hall, Kenaston had had a run-in with official Ray Frisbee. On the last show at the Klamath Legion Hall, Kenaston got in a mid-match tussle with referee Ray Frisbee, and Frisbee, having none of it, socked Kenaston in the jaw, knocking out 4 of Kenaston's teeth. Frisbee received a broken finger for his efforts. As such, Kenaston refused to wrestle at the debut Armory show unless there was a change in officials. Referee Toy Aho volunteered as substitute. Though outweighed, Babe Estes picked up the first fall with a Boston Crab in 17 minutes and 18 seconds. Bob Kenaston roared back, picking up the second fall in 1 minute and 7 seconds, and the third fall in just 40 seconds, both with a reverse headlock. After the final bell, Kenaston refused to let go of the reverse headlock. Referee Toy Aho reversed the decision of the fall due to a foul and gave Babe Estes the victory. Before the start of the main event, Louis Poland, owner of a confectionery in nearby Chiloquin, Oregon, presented promoter Mack Lillard with a horseshoe floral piece in celebration of the success of the night. And then came the Battle Royal. A couple of notes on the kind of Battle Royal run on this night. Wrestlers are eliminated from this Battle Royal via pinfall or submission, not being thrown over the top rope. And when the action boils down to just 2 men, those men get a rest period, and then they have a regular match to determine the winner. The 5 grapplers participating this evening were Toots Estes, Dan Savich, Joe Hubka, Harry Dementral, and, fan favorite, the Russian Lion of Portland, Al Karasick. Karasick scored the first fall, eliminating Joe Hubka with a body press. He then set his sights on Harry Dementral, eventually eliminating the bald-headed Greek with a Boston Crab. All the while, Toots Estes and Dan Savich were pummeling each other. When they saw that Al Karasick had thinned the herd, they immediately teamed up to eliminate the former light heavyweight champion. Al Karasick fought like hell against the 2 men, coming close to scoring a double knockout several times. Estes and Savich were so eager to eliminate Karasick that they'd occasionally fight against each other for the privilege of eliminating the Russian. Savich was able to flatten Karasick with a Sonnenberg, a flying tackle named after Dynamite Gus Sonnenberg, and Estes made the cover. Savich joined him, and both men apparently legally eliminated Karasick together. The paper would report that even though he lost, Al Karasick was the wrestler of the night. After a brief rest period, Toots Estes and Dan Savich renewed their rivalry in the final segment of the Battle Royal. Twice during the encounter, Savich tumbled from the ring to the floor of the armory, but both times he returned ready to continue. 10 minutes and 51 seconds after the match began, Toots was able to finish off Savich with a shoulder butt and a body press to win the match and the main event. The evening was a big success. Mack Lillard did not rest on the laurels of that horseshoe-shaped flower arrangement. The very next day, the Evening Herald started to promote next Tuesday's card. The headline in Thursday's paper read, "Karasick will return for the main event. Frisbee may meet Marine." The main event for the October 8th, 1935 card would be Al Karasick taking on the husky French-Canadian from Montreal, Andre Adoree. Andre Adoree is said to weigh 210 pounds. His tallness, as the paper calls it, and ruggedness will cause trouble for Karasick. Andre Adoree, real name Al Baffert, was a wrestler and an actor and a stuntman. Born in France, Adoree had his first recorded match in 1925. In later years, he'd have roles in films such as Escape from Red Rock and Space Master X7, and he would help launch the Cauliflower Alley Club. Another match signed was newcomer Hans Schroder tangling with the Battle Royal winner Toots Estes. I couldn't find much about Hans Schroder online, perhaps due in part to there being another Hans Schroder who wrestled in the 1960s through the late 1970s. Finally, promoter Mack Lillard said to be attempting to book a grudge match between official Ray Frisbee and Bob Kenaston, stemming from Kenaston refusing to wrestle last week if Frisbee was officiating. The next day, the papers teased the possible grudge match between Frisbee and Kenaston, but said it had yet to be signed. In Saturday's paper, the news broke. The eagerly awaited match between Frisbee and Kenaston would be postponed. Frisbee was still nursing the broken finger he suffered by socking Kenaston 2 weeks ago and was advised to stay out of action for at least another week. Bob Kenaston would now be facing Jack Londos, younger brother of former world champion Jim Londos. Or so the newspaper says. In researching Jack Londos, I found someone with that name wrestled a lot on the West Coast and some in the Southeast. On the West Coast, he was Jim Londos' younger brother. In the Southeast, he was a first cousin. Anyway, someone was capitalizing on the Londos name for sure. Bob Kenaston versus Jack Londos would open the card with a 20-minute time limit. Al Karasick versus Andre Adoree and Toots Estes versus Hans Schroder would be best-of-3 fall matches with 60-minute time limits. It was another record crowd gathered in the Klamath Armory on October 8, 1935. In the opening match, Bob Kenaston was again disqualified by referee Toy Aho. The nasty Marine from San Diego refused to stop choking and pulling the hair of Jack Londos. Not much else was said about the opening match, though the paper notes that Ray Frisbee was on hand and was the official for the other two matches. In the middle match, Toots Estes was far outweighed by the methodical German Hans Schroder. Toots picked up the first fall, toppling Schroder with an airplane spin and a body press in 7 minutes and 5 seconds. In the second fall, Schroder pounded Toots to the mat with 2 consecutive body slams to win the fall in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The paper said Schroder knew the game thoroughly and picked up the third fall in 4 minutes and 47 seconds with a body press, as Toots Estes had tried to put Schroder over the top rope. The first fall of the main event lasted 26 minutes and 10 seconds, as Al Karasick faced Andre Adoree. The paper said of the first fall, Adoree, his countenance affecting supreme boredom, resisted every one of the Russian Lion's attacks. Adoree played a cat-and-mouse game with Karasick. Twice, Adoree was able to lock Karasick in a knee-twisting leg hold, but Karasick was able to break it. After locking Karasick in the hold the first time, Adoree focused solely on Karasick's knee. The third time he locked Karasick in the hold, the Russian Lion gave up, ending the first fall. So swollen and stiff was Karasick's knee after the attack, he had to be helped from the ring by his seconds, and word came shortly after that he would not be able to continue. Al Karasick, the Russian Lion of Portland, had conceded due to injury, and Andre Adoree was victorious. Mack Lillard wasted no time in booking matches for the following Tuesday, October 15th. A headline in Wednesday's paper announced that Paul Boesch had been signed to face Andre Adoree on the next Armory card. Boesch had come through Klamath Falls a few weeks prior and had what the papers called a sensational match at the Legion Hall against Joe Hubka. Lillard also announced that Al Karasick would take on Hans Schroder, and Chief Thunderbear from Vancouver Island would tangle with Bob Kenaston. Throughout the week, the papers played up Paul Boesch's wrestling style. Though he'd lost in his match weeks ago against Joe Hubka, fans were completely taken with his wrestling style and eager to see him wrestle in the Armory. They also mentioned that Kenaston had now lost 2 matches via fouls. They were cementing him as a real heel of a character. On Friday, the paper announced that Gus Sonnenberg might just roll into Klamath Falls for the October 22nd card and would likely face the winner of the Paul Boesch-Andre Adoree match on the 15th. Sonnenberg had come through Klamath Falls before, but this would mark his first time at the Armory, if it happened. The paper noted that details were not finalized yet. Saturday's paper ran a picture of Paul Boesch admiring some medals he had won and ran down the Armory card, again teasing the prize of a match with Sonnenberg for the winner of the Boesch-Adoree match. Another big crowd was at the Klamath Armory on October 15th, 1935. The opening match saw Bob Kenaston defeat newcomer Chief Thundercloud in 18 minutes with a reverse headlock. Toy Aho was the referee. The middle match between Al Karasick and Hans Schroder was ruled a draw as it went to the full 60-minute time limit. The first fall came in 37 minutes when Karasick locked Schroder in a Boston Crab. Schroder came back in the second, pinning Karasick in 10 minutes and 20 seconds. The time limit expired before the tiebreaker could happen, but the paper reports that Karasick was going strong at the end. In the main event, Paul Boesch took the first fall against Andre Adoree with a series of dropkicks, 24 minutes into the match. This first fall saw both men lock each other in and escape from various holds. The second fall went to Adoree, who was able to trap Boesch in his dreaded knee twister, the same move that he had sidelined Al Karasick with last week. The third fall lasted only 52 seconds. Boesch delivered another drop kick, but Adoree survived the attack and clamped down on Boesch's head with a headlock to get the victory. The paper called it one of the fastest and most spectacular matches seen in Klamath Falls in many months. Adoree, it would seem, would now be in line to face Gus Sonnenberg next week. Except the paper announced there wouldn't be wrestling at the Armory next week, as Mack Lillard would be promoting a boxing event. In a separate article about the boxing, Lillard noted that Gus Sonnenberg had unexpectedly left the area for a series of matches on the Atlantic coast. With boxing taking over the Klamath Armory instead of wrestling the following Tuesday, the paper turned to promoting that event. There was little talk of Klamath Falls wrestling, but the paper did occasionally run Associated Press results from around the United States and Canada. Boxing would go on to replace wrestling at the Armory until Tuesday, November 12, 1935. When wrestling's return was announced in the papers in early November, only one familiar name was on the list: Bob Kenaston. But we'll have to see what the Mean Marine from San Diego gets up to on the next episode of the Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast. Well, there you have the first episode of the Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast. Thanks for checking it out. I would love to know what you think of this episode. I do want to kind of end these episodes by giving sort of my thoughts on what has happened. First of all, I just want to say I know next to nothing about wrestling from this time period. I've heard a few of the names, but I'm not a scholar of the time. So I am learning all of these people, all of these names, as I'm researching it. So if I'm pronouncing a name wrong or saying a name wrong or getting something incorrect factually about the wrestler, I apologize. Feel free to send me an email or send me a message and let me know, and I will try to, be better as I'm going forward. Now, of course, I do want to say that the territory that we're talking about is much bigger. And when I originally started to do this show, and I started in 1939, I researched and I had a pretty good idea of how, what cities Mack Lillard ran and what night of the week different matches were on. When I decided to go back to 1935 and start all over again, I didn't research that as much and instead focused on the story of Mack getting wrestling up and running at the Armory. But that's all to say, it's like, as I said in episode 0, all of these wrestlers and Mack Lillard promoted elsewhere, they wrestled elsewhere, all that kind of stuff, but we're just focused on Klamath Falls and what you would see as a fan in Klamath Falls. Okay, so here's my question. Were Count Vargo and Gus Sonnenberg ever booked? Or was this Mack Lillard putting the names out there in hopes to kind of drum up publicity? I know that Gus Sonnenberg, it seems from my research, was a little more well-known than Count Vargo, but, this is twice now in just a few weeks that Mack Lillard had said someone is going to come and wrestle here, and then they have not wrestled here. We'll see if this continues to be a trend, but it's just interesting. Of course, the card is always subject to change, so it's quite possible that contracts fell through and all that kind of stuff, and maybe Gus Sonnenberg not making it to the next event is the reason why they brought boxing. I don't know. We'll see as we go forward. The other thing I wanted to say about the upcoming thing, not to give too much of a spoiler about November 1935, is that it's pretty much all new wrestlers. As I said in the little outro there, only Bob Kenaston is the name that you recognized. But there is a big name, a name that will become very, very big, a name that I read about and actually did a whole episode on when I was researching 1939, which we'll get to eventually, will be showing up for the first time at the Armory. And so I'm super excited to kind of go back in time and see what he was like then. In terms of wrestlers that we talked about this episode, I'm a huge mark now for Bob Kenaston. Just the way that he was written in the paper, I've always loved the heels, and I think if I had been a little kid in 1935, not only would I probably be dead now, but I would also just absolutely love Bob Kenaston because I love the bad guys. And the whole thing that he has a beef with Ray Frisbee, the referee, I just think is absolutely hilarious. So I'm excited to see if that match happens. I actually don't know if it happens or not, but I'm very excited to see where this goes as it goes forward. Now, before we go, I do want to take a quick look at the rankings. This is something I'm going to build on as we go forward. But we're just going to look at the top 5 wrestlers, and this is just in terms of who wins and losses. There's nothing else going on here. So this is just wins and losses. And at the top of the list, ranked number 1, Andre Adoree. He's got 2 wins, 0 losses. Right behind him is Floyd Wolfgang and Toots Estes. They both have 1 win apiece. And then rounding out the top 5 is Hans Schroder with 1 win and 1 loss. Now, our good friend Bob Kenaston is further down the list. He's got 1 win and 2 losses. And, this is the first month, so doing rankings for this is probably kind of silly. But as we go on, I'm going to keep a running tally of these rankings. And it'll be interesting to see who had the most success and who will be at the top of the rankings, as we get further on into the podcast. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast. For links to the resources I used for this episode and to see the entire rankings for the month of October 1935, visit klamatharmory.com. This podcast is a production of Saturday Morning Media and made possible thanks to the support of the channel members over at the Solo Promoter YouTube channel. Consider supporting the show by becoming a member today. Visit solopromoter.com and then click on the Join button for more information. You can also tell a fellow wrestling fan about the show or leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for your support. The Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast is copyright 2025 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Bachoco, executive producer. All rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com.
You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.